GLF's Brave New World welcomes you back to our second session of the day in partnership with Etsy India. Those of you who missed our earlier session, China and the World, Rana Mitter in conversation with William Dalrymple, and all our other sessions featuring Ian McEwan, Marcus de Sotoy, Paul Zakaria, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, Neil Gaiman, Howard Jacobson, and so many others. You can catch these on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. We're proud to share with you that we've exceeded 2.8 million views for this platform, and none of this would have been possible without your involvement, participation, and appreciation. As we lead into our 100th episode next week, we would love to hear from you as to how GLF's Brave New World has impacted your worldview. Please do post your video on contact@teamworkarts.com or via WhatsApp on +91 989 1155107 by the end of this weekend. Our official radio partner is Red FM Bajate Raho. Our next session today is Textiles, the Fabric of Memory. Ritu Kumar and Himanshu Wardhan in conversation with Supriya Dravid. A session evoking textile narratives, the stories they tell, and the memories they hold with celebrated designer Ritu Kumar and tech entrepreneur Himanshu Wardhan in conversation with former editor of Elle India, Supriya Dravid. Ritu Kumar has been at the forefront of the fashion industry for over 3 decades, and her brand has played an integral role in reviving textile skills and providing employment to hundreds of artisans. One of India's foremost designers, she's developed a unique style of her own, reflecting the ancient traditions of Indian craftsmanship in a contemporary vocabulary. She was the first woman to introduce the boutique culture in India under the brand name Ritu's. Today, she has around 84 outlets, both in India and abroad. Her book, Costumes and Textiles of Royal India, chronicles the history of textiles and art design in India. And currently, she's in the process of finishing her second book, Crossroads, Textile Journeys with Ritu Kumar, a series of publications on a perspective of dynamic handcrafted tradition at the crossroads of change. Himanshu Wardhan is a technology executive and entrepreneur with experience of building and leading businesses in India and the United States. As the managing director for Etsy in India, his key focus is mobilizing and empowering the creative community in India and connecting micro entrepreneurs from different parts of the country to the world through the Etsy platform. Himanshu has also been an entrepreneur based in Mountain View, where he founded Meant More, a peer-to-peer mentorship and admission consulting platform. He's been a consultant with McKinsey in the US and India offices and was the sales strategy and operations lead at HP in Palo Alto. Supriya Dravid is the former editor of Elle India, and prior to that, she had stints at Harper Bazaar and India Today. She's the author of the novel, The Cool Dark Place. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it in the comment section below. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, hang in there. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Textiles, the Fabric of Memory, Ritu Kumar and Himanshu Wardhan in conversation with Supriya Dravid. Over to you, Supriya.
Thank you, Sanjay. Hello, Rituji and Himanshu. Rituji, I want to start with you. Let's start at the very beginning. You began your journey in 1969 with just 4 hand block printers in Calcutta. What is your first textile memory? And can you give us a little insight into your journey from then to now?
Well, I think the whole thing happened by accident. I was studying to be an art historian in America, and I was learning history of Western art. Then I realized that I knew little or nothing about Indian art. We were never taught that. And when I came to Calcutta, I was lucky enough to join a museology course, which took me into the villages where there was a excavation going on. And I happened to be very lucky to find this village of Sirampur, where at one time, about 150 years before, there used to be the largest export of silk printed goods on the banks of the river and being sent to Europe. I was very curious because nothing remotely like that was available then. We were importing stuff from Britain, and we were importing our own prints done in Lancashire. So, there, by Hunger Story, it was both history, curiosity, and I wanted to see whether we could turn the clock back.
Himanshu, I'd like to also ask you a little bit about your textile memory. And also, you have I have two questions. Your first textile memory too, and you have a traditionally entrepreneurial background. What led you to set up Etsy in India and in a way marry the two?
Yeah. For me, my first textile memory was actually going back to my school days. Obviously, for a kid that is growing up, it's about the school uniform, and with changing seasons, how the school uniform changes. That's the kind of first time when I got a sense of what textile and material and clothing is all about. And then, as with a lot of Indian households, with me as well, my father had earlier lived in London. He had a long sort of a lot of collection of his clothes. And when I started to grow up, I was wearing some of his clothes that were 20, 30 years old. So that was a very, that kind of evokes a lot of emotions, obviously, and that's what is textiles all about. It does evoke those emotions. Now, coming to your second question regarding my background and what I'm doing right now. So if we go back to a few years back, I've been a regular MBA business person, did a startup, worked in consulting. Last few years since I've been part of creative industry, and more specifically last 3 years since I've been Etsy, it has been extremely inspiring experience for me. In my role, where we have thousands and thousands of sellers in different parts of the world and also in India. In my role, I get to interact with these creative entrepreneurs who are making these products at home and designing them at home almost on a daily basis. And that has completely changed my perspective, the way I think about design, the way I think about creative professions itself. And I myself have taken up some of, at least as a hobby right now. So yeah, I think that has been an extremely interesting experience, and to be honest, for me, a little different part of my skill set or side of the brain is now used than what was used a few years back.
Rituji, I want to ask you a question. As a brand, you have consistently worked with a vision that reflects the traditions of Indian craftsmanship with a contemporary twist. Your appreciation for natural fabrics and craft traditions has evolved into an aesthetic signature, which is visible in all your work. Tell us a little bit about your journey and how did you evolve as a designer and as an entrepreneur?
Well, the journey again started with an absence of anything in India. And that was really very frustrating, because if I needed to get a fabric that was at one time made in India, I had to go to London, to the V&A. But slowly and steadily, I think it was post-independence, and a lot of us went out into the field, almost like barefoot doctors. And we didn't know where to go. Nobody told us what to find and where to find it. Popul Jaikar was there. But except for some small pointers, I didn't know what Zardozi was or what the embroidery was. I was just in a 300-mile radius of huts where they were growing rice as well as doing embroideries. But slowly and steadily, you began understanding this is not a small craft. These are guilds that have come down from generations and thousands of years down, and it's in the DNA of the people. And India itself, the textile business is the second largest after agriculture. The handcraft itself employs 16 million people. as an estimate. So if you really look at the multitude of people that are involved in this country and how deeply they are involved. Because at that one time, India used to export 25% of the world's fabrics. So, to find an absence of that got me very excited. And one project after another started falling into place. People started getting jobs. I started enjoying looking at the things till I realized that we had a very strong vocabulary in India, which had almost got extinct. Not only extinct, it had been taken away by towns such as Paisley, calling the Kashmir shawl Paisley, etc. Even our vocabulary had been lost in India, and thereby started a journey.
And for over 4 decades, you worked with, diverse textile motifs, craft techniques, kalamkari, ikat, Banarsi, Paisley. You made that famous. And over the years, you also patronized several organizations working in these areas, developing skills, taking them to the market. Which one is your favorite, technique, motive, which is closest to your heart, or is that like picking a favorite child?
Well, I think we are spoilt with an excess of design in this country because almost every village, every area has its own handwriting. So there is no favorite child except that I love the teardrop from Kashmir. But I have to tell you a story here. I'm glad you asked. The most difficult area to work was Banaras. And that came as a surprise to me because it has a 1,000-year-old history where the fabrics have been woven. It took me 4 years to figure out what had happened. Very simply, the Chinese had dumped raw yarns, which were not meant to be made into saris in Banaras. They were sold very, very cheap, and most people started using them. And those saris don't drape, they don't look good, they are stiff. And the dumping of the Chinese yarns has really caused that whole area to almost become destitute. Now, this brings me to why I think more people have to go out into the field and discover what is going to go on now after this COVID. Where are the Chinese going to go? Are they going to come to us in India with this huge population? And why Banaras? Because it is the biggest market for the weddings in India and the most lucrative place that they could come to. So I think more than just now reviving that we did, or I did at one point in my areas, the need now is to control what we have. There's nothing wrong in people looking at it as inspiration, but what does happen with the inspiration? We can inspire ourselves with our own fabrics. We don't need machine-made mirror work to destroy the entire area in Gujarat. And this is what it's coming to. Now, it's not to revive what we have, but to keep what we have. Okay, we may also go the mechanized way, and we probably will have to keep both. But I think this predatory situation with China is very worrying. And I would really feel that if there is one real baby of mine, it would be anywhere where this has happened.
I have a two-pronged question. One is to avoid becoming this dumping yard of cheaper products, how can we as a country not lose our identity? Because we have this legacy of unique craftsmanship and heritage. We also have the artisans. So how can we ensure that this doesn't happen? What would you suggest? And the second thing is, when you talked about Banaras, I wanted to talk a little bit about the gender dynamics. A lot of the weavers were primarily men, and when you go there, you are weaving saris for women. Can you talk to me a little bit about that as well?
Well, we're going off a tangent, but I would love to. It's not only the weavers who are men, but the dealers of these saris are men. And they obviously have never worn a sari. So they would have found out that this Chinese yarn is just completely killing their entire city of work. So this is, the gender definitely comes in there. And there's a middleman here. And I would like to go back to Himanshu and ask him whether there would be any way that he has, where a middleman can be excluded out of this equation between the craftspeople and the buyer, because there is a buyer out there and there's a product out here. Unfortunately for us, the product has not been able to be replicated, but it's a matter of time. And actually, if there's going to be replication, I rather that we replicate our own designs rather than some other country take it over. So unless we find a mode whereby this huge craft uh, source is given some sort of exposure to the world with prices which don't take in a middleman, we don't take in the retail setup, we will be able to survive, and we will be able to retain the only country in the world which has retained its handicrafts. Most other countries, their handicrafts have reached the museums and they're there only for reference. We have 16 million people. We really need to find a solution. Maybe a new kind of motivation and way of selling, a startup. And it's a young person's business. It is not something that the government can handle. They've been trying for 30 years. They're not in retailing. They cannot merchandise. And it's not, they should pack it up and just hand it over to somebody who can take it on.
Himanshu, do you want to weigh in at this point with about your Stand with Small campaign? Because it is in lieu of what Rituji was also speaking. Because in a way, you've used that campaign also to help sellers, communities during this pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, it's been very inspiring to obviously hear Rituji always and today as well on this topic. And, regarding the specific topic about connecting artisans and people who are making the products directly to the buyers, that's one challenge, and that's one thing that I am and we are thinking at Etsy India all the time. Globally, Etsy was founded with the philosophy and the intent to connect directly the maker or the designer of the product with the person who is buying the product and consuming the product. That's how it was founded in 2005. And it grew in some sort of a global movement, and it grew organically over a long period of time. And it has reached to a stage where we have a buyer and a seller in nearly every country in the world, with over 2.8 million sellers, and out of which, interestingly to your question, Supriya, out of which almost 83% are women, and 93%, around 93% or 95% are home-based creative entrepreneurs. So that has been the global story. Now, when we dial back to India, what we have been able to do that in last 3 years is effectively at least mobilize the urban audience very well. People who are very well digitally native or digitally connected, they can operate online businesses, at least basic things. I mean, not about building a website or anything. At least they can operate a basic social media profile. So we have mobilized the urban community really well. In last couple of years, we've also been trying actually quite a lot in order to mobilize the rural audience as well. So to give you an example, in Varanasi, what we did was that we have a person there who is helping these artisans. So he's gotten about 400 of these weavers on the platform directly, without any middlemen. Then we realized that there was a problem that these guys can make good sarees, but then to dispatch the order, they would not have the know-how. So this guy would also help them out. Then we did a full photo session where they could get their products and get pictures clicked as well. So we made a start in smaller pockets. Let's say with working with the in Varanasi, which happens to be my favorite place in India, to be honest. And then also going to some other places like whether it's Odisha or some other parts of Madhya Pradesh as well, where we have done and we have tried to engage with the audience. What I would say is that we and maybe a lot of other people might also be trying to kind of do it, and we are doing it in a more concerted way, and we are very focused on it. It will take time because, and I think the analogy that I draw is let's say cab aggregation businesses. When the cab aggregation businesses started, a lot of the drivers who started to own the cabs earlier did not know how to use a smartphone. They could never
Yeah.
operate that. And now I want to kind of think about how do we get the same level of acceptance and adoption of technology, which helps them to drive livelihoods by selling directly to the buyers. So it will take time. Even the cab aggregation reached at this particular stage when it started 6 years back. I think we are probably in the early days, and as we make concerted efforts in few years, I do believe that we can reach a stage where a lot of these rural artisans also recognize the importance of this and get online. And sorry, go ahead.
Is it easy to get them online, because a lot of them may not have access to smartphones? So is
Yeah.
that why you are deploying people across, say, Odisha or Varanasi, or how do you ensure that they come onto your platform when they don't have a smartphone?
Yeah. The interesting part actually is that most of them actually have access to smartphones. They have
Okay.
access to smartphones. Another trend that we are seeing is that the next generation of these artisans are not taking up this profession, or they're not taking the craft. But what we have figured out is that, but they do not also have a lot of other gainful employment opportunities. So I think what we have figured out is how we have started to engage with these artisans is with the newer generation. So to give you an example, we have this jewelry maker in a third, fourth generation jewelry maker in Jaipur. He's 22 years old. Now, maybe, he's not the main person who's making the jewelry. His father and his grandfather are making this jewelry, but he's the one who's helping them run the business online, or to build the designs and the brands online. So I think as the younger generation also understands the potential of the technology platforms to directly connect with buyers across the world, they are also starting to get interested into this and saying that, hey, this is not just about selling, handicraft to a wholesaler who sells it to another wholesaler who sells it to another retailer. This is about that you can also think about making your own story and creating your own brand. And once you start, what we've also observed is that once you start the journey, you handhold them for, let's say, once, twice, 3 or 5 times. You help them to write a story about themselves, create a little bit of brand presence, and you help them out to maybe fulfill the orders and ship the orders 2 or 3 or 4, 5 times. And then they are independent. We have already started to see that happen with few of our creative entrepreneurs in the rural areas, where we have helped them to a certain point of time. But a large number of them are still in the early stages, where we are still handholding them. And as soon as they realize the potential and they understand the mechanics of fulfilling and making products for the global audience and directly selling them, they would be able to do it themselves as well.
Rituji, how do you see this work across the pandemic? I mean, the plight of the weavers has been at the forefront. And across, I mean, how do you see the business of fashion changing in this new normal? Because we know that retail is bleak and people may not want to invest into something that is particularly very expensive. And how do we find our way around sustainability, ensuring that the weavers don't lose their livelihood without really losing focus on our craft's lineage?
Well, I think, to be very practical, what Himanshu is saying is totally true. The new generation does not want to get into the grind of the profession. It is not to say that they do not want or understand the weaving. You need to be a mathematical genius to be able to weave an ikat sari. No, I'm not joking. It is in their DNA, whether it's the embroidery or whatever they are doing, it's in their DNA. It's come down generations of understanding yarns, colors, etc. That is why that's one area which nobody really has been able to copy or ape that well. But what I see is we need to take the drudgery out. We have to use their textile skills or whatever skills that they have within them and and let them become entrepreneurs in that area. I'll tell you a story that we had sent a small order to Odisha, and they were very happy. Neopatna is a small village, and very happy to receive that order, except that all the children had run away and they had gone to the city. And where had they gone? They'd gone to Surat. And they thought they were going to become great mechanics or something in Surat, but they ended up just carrying weight of that cloth from one point to another point. And when they heard about this order, they came running back. It's not that they are alien and they alienated to the craft. If you see a weaver, you would not want your child to be a weaver. It is such a miserable, non-paying profession. But what I see, there's a little gleam out there, is our embroidery workers have invested in sending their children to a boarding school, a missionary one in Darjeeling. And when that child has come back, he wants to become a ramp model, and he also wants to buy a machine which can do embroidery. And I'm telling you, when I give them an embroidery to do, the recreation on that machine is something that child sits there with a graph paper and puts together far better than anybody else will be able to do. So I'm really hoping that we can use the DNA of our craftspeople, not really the sweat and the blood that they have to put in, and the very inconvenient circumstances under which they work. But at the same time, I think they do have a far better lifestyle in their villages than they would have in a slum in Bombay. And they would be better off not being on a rickshaw, pulling a rickshaw, but also being somebody who's creative within that situation. And if we can find them a way of being able to sell their products, I have no issue with the same embroidery done with a machine. That's the future of the world tomorrow. And you have to accept it and enjoy the fact that the person who's also doing it is progressing, and you're not regressing into a situation where you're just using child labor to make handicrafts.
Very well put. Himanshu, what have you learned from this pandemic? I mean, has it given birth to a lot of new sellers, since everyone is working at a home? They have to earn their livelihood. You have a platform like Etsy that will encourage and democratize sellers in that format?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in general, when we think about e-commerce in India, what we have seen over the last few years, it has obviously been a very fast growth. But what we have seen is predominantly imagery around e-commerce has been dominated with cheap quality products, maybe made in China or other parts of the world, sold for large discounted prices. That is what e-commerce had started to become associated with. And also the people who would benefit the most as sellers would be large traders, because you need to get a lot of volumes and economies of scale. So even though e-commerce and technology is meant to actually connect people in a low-cost manner, what it did in India was actually create very low-price, cheap quality products. Now, what we are trying to do is what I call the whole democratization process, where anybody can start, anybody who's making or designing can set up an online presence and start to sell with just having an internet connection and basic few other basic things. It doesn't require a lot of capital. It just requires your willingness and creativity to get started very, very quickly. And then with a platform like Etsy, where we do not allow traders and large sellers to be on the platform, we only want people who are making or designing the products to be on the platform. They are the people who get discovered. They are the people who get the orders, because you do not get crowded out by cheaper products or large traders. So that is a trend that we have seen now. During obviously the recent times, a lot of people have been impacted. Maybe few months back, or there was a bit of inertia in some people to go online. They were managing their boutiques or smaller stores, physical stores. They were kind of comfortable. and they were not very comfortable with getting on with new technology. So obviously with these times, it has definitely pushed a large number of people to go online, and we have seen that surge coming out in terms of people who are starting to sell on from India in the recent past. And I only believe, I think that trend is going to increase, and this is not just about India. This trend is probably happening in across different parts of the world, and I only see that this particular situation, and especially in India, where there was a little bit of inertia or hesitation, that this trend will only continue over a period of time.
Literally, I want to ask you a question. You've, I think, in a way, seen it all. You're one of the first women to introduce the boutique culture, and now you have a very strong online presence. How does one take this legacy onto the next generation in this new normal?
I think the online presence is something that is here to stay. The convenience is something that we are all beginning to appreciate. Also, it is physically much more comfortable to be able to assess, pick up whatever you want, not only from one country, but across the world. And you would be able to then perhaps make a trip and go and pick up the piece that you have decided to. Having said that, I don't think the touch feel is going away anywhere, but it would remain for the high end, because that is where you would really need to experience the garment.
Yeah.
You don't need to experience a jogging suit, so you can very easily pick that up. But having said that, the Indian crafts themselves can be very attractive, and I think they are more attractive even on the website than you would have a plain t-shirt. So I think they're both here to stay, but I think physical retailing will be left for the larger companies who can carry the weight. But this is very good news for small enterprises who do not want to have an excise guy coming to them, who do not want to give GST, who do not want all that nuisance which comes with retailing. So I think we're going to see a very major change, not only in India, but I see a very major change in Europe. They have almost 100% given out their entire production to China. Now, what are they going to fill that up with? Because the Chinese garments are getting very expensive. And if it is all available on the net, who is going to trudge down Avenue Montaigne to go into, unless you have a lot of time, one shop after another. So I don't know whether there's any solution. I think we'll have a bit of both, and I think the product is going to win.
Of course, any day.
That is also very important.
I think because the consumers will also know what is viable for them. I mean, what is sustainable, what is important, what is necessary. I think they'll use this time to choose what is right and what is important and necessary, right?
I have another thing to add. I have already, within the last 2 months, begun to see a real interest back in the classics. Something that we used to make 20 years back, or even in the 1980s. I'm getting pictures that can we have this again, because they are durable, they are not fast,
timeless,
and it is a handicrafted thing, something that, especially in the bridal lines. So I think that will stay in India. I don't think we're losing our bridal customers to anyone, but I think it will be again back to the classics.
Tell me a little bit about the book you're working on, about the history of Indian fashion. It's a lot of your personal perspective, and it's also a travelogue.
When I was traveling all this time, I used to make little bullet points. Like, I went to this place, I don't know where it is. Where can you eat? No place. No hotel. I mean, how did you get there? Oh, heavens, it was a ambassador car, and, it was creaking and it was leaking and the rain came, so on and so forth. I'm really surprised that a lot of us even made it when we did make it. So as time went on, I started writing bullet points for every place. Like New Patna, nobody knows where it is, but if you read my book, you'll find out where to stay, what to eat, what crabs to get from the water, and so on and so forth. So it started like that, so that the younger generation who has absolutely no contact with the craft areas, and we have nothing but craft areas in this country, should be able to go and make a collection, not being inspired only by Paris, but being inspired by our roots, where all this happens and where it gets created. So now these bullet points, thanks to Sonjoy and other people, are getting converted into some sort of a book that somebody can actually access. And then I'm making sure that it has great points of food, great points of where you can live, and great points of how many hours it will take you to get there.
Wonderful. We're actually going to go on to some audience questions right now. Agastya asks to the both of you, many manufacturers use the work of rural karigars of India. Let's say the product and designs of Chandni Chowk are all used by many shops and these karigars are paid very less. What are your comments on it?
Me?
Both of you. It's addressed to the two of you.
Himanshu,
let's start with you.
Maybe Rituji, you should go ahead first.
Okay. This is exactly the point that I'm trying to make, is there is not very much space for that middleman. And there's not very much space for the rents that he has to pay. He's not a villain, but the fact is the dynamics of this trade are such that the embroidery component perhaps of that garment is a small one compared to the overheads he has to do, all the marketing that he has to do. If there was a way of connecting the karigar, he could possibly, it's not ideal, but that would be the ideal solution. But if without that ideal solution, I think we just have to live with this reality of the way the world functions in the retail market. Himanshu?
Yeah, I think Rituji put it really well, that there are these cost structures, and she's put it really well, and that's really been intent of Etsy. We've been able to do that in urban areas, and I talked about the challenge of doing it for the rural karigar, the person who is really at the end of the spectrum. Is definitely challenging, and the ideal solution is definitely connecting them through technology. I'm a big optimist. I do believe that this is going to happen. Disintermediation in this particular industry is going to happen, where the makers are going to be connected to the buyers directly through technology. It might be it might benefit the karigar a lot, but and it might not benefit few people who are in the intermediary role at this point of time.
Jagmohan Manchanda asks, I think to the two of you again, a brand offered about 30% discount on a new range against deferred deliveries when lockdown commenced. The idea was to support artisans. Why can't others adopt such innovative measures to cope with the pandemic?
Maybe Rituji, I should.
Rituji, do you want to answer that? Sorry.
I haven't totally understood the question, but the thing is, there may have been, after the pandemic, a reason why people had to get rid of inventory. Way of people or keep their situations going. And I don't think he's the only one. There are many, not only in India, across the world, who are offering huge discounts to get rid of inventory. They may have to pay labor, they may have to pay other charges, but this is not an unusual one.
Also, I think we have to, if I could add, we have to also kind of understand that the nature of times that we are facing, nobody knows the end time also. Okay, so if it was that, okay, this is there for 1 month and then you will get your delivery, especially when countries across the world started to lock down, people did not have any sense when they would actually be able to produce and make the products.
True. Seema Bhalla has a question for Rituji. The problem with silk for saris in Banaras is the source of material. Today, mulberry silk is not easily available. More research will have to be undertaken for acquiring different forms of pure silk. Are you working on this aspect?
Let me first tell you that there is no problem here at all. It's a problem that we've created for ourselves. The main ingredients of a Banarsi sari is something called patpana. It's an untwisted, hand-spun yarn that comes from Murshidabad and these areas where the women spin the yarn. That gives the gap between the weft and the warp for it to flow. And that's how the saris are so flowy. The minute you substitute that yarn with a thick Chinese yarn, which is meant for curtaining, you have a problem. So there is no need, just go back to what we did. And we've been doing it for thousands of years, so we will have no more problems.
There's another question here for you, which says, is there a market for clothes depicting a history of textile? Something that brings forward both the history of fabric and craftsmanship. I think that's fairly easy.
I think I'll leave that to the kids. This is like really the fastest fashion that I've heard of.
No, but I think a lot of what you do symbolizes this.
Well, what I do is actually go into the history of our own motives. And therein, of course, you can have fun because all of them tend to work with each other. They were all done in vegetable dyes. And this kind of patchwork and reusing and revitalizing clothes is not unusual to our culture. We've been doing it forever on kanthas, on things like that. So yes, this perhaps is one of the solutions. You may just want to ask your customers to bring back clothes so you can revive them because there's such beautiful embroideries gone into them. That could be a very good way to go.
I mean, you have people writing into you asking you to bring back clothes that they bought from you in the 80s. So it's a clear example of that, right?
Well, that's my mother had that lehenga. I want a bigger one and I want a different color. And would you please redo it because, I can't find something like that. Yes, I told you, there's a reversal towards the classics now. I'm seeing it more and more.
I'm just checking if we have any more questions. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so there's one last question here, which says, what do you mean by reviving the craft when you say we don't need to revive it, rather we must control, save it? Can you please elaborate?
I don't understand. Can you say that again, please?
It says, what do you mean by reviving the craft when you say that we don't need to revive it, but rather we must save it? Can you please elaborate? I think it's kind of contradictory.
Talking about different disciplines. I was talking about Banaras, where if you go back to your original construction of the sari, you are fine. But there are crafts in India which have absolutely died, or had died at one time, like the Jaipur hand block printing, like the embroideries. They need to be revived so that what the craftsman can do can come out and be used for him as a livelihood, and also to enrich our own lives with that embroidery. So no two crafts are the same. So what is true of one is not true of the other, mercifully. So we do not have a uniform craft handwriting.
Agree. Thank you so much, the two of you. I don't think we have any more questions. Yes, and time is up. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor to be interviewing the both of you.
Thank you so
Over
much.
To you, Sanjay.
Thank you so much, Supriya, and thank you so much, Ritu and Himanshu, for that absolutely fascinating conversation. And, I do believe that the state of crafts and artisanal products will be on the rise. And we need many more, both Etsy's, and we need many more craft entrepreneurs like Ritu Kumar to be able to make that possible. And really, in many ways, look within rather than always looking out. Thank you to our official radio partners, Red FM, Bajate Raho, and thank you for our session partner, Etsy India. Please do remember to log in on Wednesday, the 29th of July, for our 100th session of JLF's Brave New World. George Saunders and the Making of Lincoln in the Bardo, in conversation with Amitabha Kumar. To celebrate the milestone 100th episode of JLF Brave New World, MacArthur genius and Booker Prize winning author of Lincoln in the Bardo, George Saunders shares insights into the mosaic of his prolific life and genre-bending body of work. In conversation with writer Ritu Kumar, Saunders, the master of modern fiction, discusses the state of contemporary literature, its relation with power and politics, and the place of darkness and kindness in stories today. And this will be at 7 p.m. IST, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The second session on Wednesday, the 29th of July, will be a special series, Heart of the Matter, on the ever-evolving status of COVID-19. And this will be at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Till then, stay safe, stay well.